Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from where you're joining us. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute public teaching for Monday, March 12th, 2018. And this is part 5 of Exploring Plasma Science. And today we have Jim McDonald with us. So welcome, Jim. Glad to have you here.
Hi, Flint. Yeah, thanks everybody. And thanks for joining in again for another episode of our Exploring Plasma Science. And today, let me share my screen. I'm going to be talking about some agriculture and some seeds. Let me get organized. And you can see that?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, very well.
All right, great. Okay, so when we have a look at the agriculture and the seeds, and it's a case of how one can use the different ganses that we've learned to make over the time and how this will affect and has effect on agriculture, whether it's our garden, our plants, or how we can actually use it. So one of the experiments that we had done was to have a look at what the effects the different fields from the different ganses would have on the seeds. And so I will be going through what we had done as an experiment to determine the outcome. Okay, so what I wanted to do was to evaluate the effects of the different GANS fields on various seeds, because as we know, seeds have a certain coating on them. So I wanted to see whether any one of the GANSes would have an impact, either good or bad, on the different types of seeds and the different GANSes. And the whole idea behind this experiment was to see whether one could use the fields in some way to store the seeds, so that we could place seeds very much like the vault up in I think it's in Norway or Iceland, storing seeds there at very cold temperatures, whether one could also create some sort of environment to store the seeds in within the fields. That will do very, very much the same effect. So what I'd done was I took quite a variety of different seeds. So we had some beetroot and rocket, some lettuce, the green and red lettuce, tatsoi and kale. So it was a good variety of different types of seeds, sort of summer, winter varieties. And then I used different types of the GANs. So we've got our CO2 GANs, the copper GANs, the zinc GANs, and CH3. So there's our 4 basic ones there. And then I'd used a mix of some of the GANSes, seawater GANs, and again some ormus, which we get from a local supplier, which what they call as ormus. So I wanted to actually see any different effect that would have. So those were the different GANSes that we had used, and then I wanted to take those same seeds and then I wanted to expose them to those fields for a 1-day period, a 5-day period, and 10 days, and see whether the duration itself would have any effect on the seeds. So what I'd done was I had placed a small amount of the GANS material in these brown jars, and then I'd filled them with distilled water. And then what I'd done was I placed all my different seeds in different test tubes and placed them in the jar. So the seeds being inside the test tubes remained dry, and then even though they were, the actual tube itself was immersed within the water containing the GANS. And that's the way I'd set up each and every one of my bottles with the different GANS. And then you can see each test tube was holding the different type of seeds. in that mixture there. And then I placed these, from a photo perspective, they're all together, but I placed them all over the house at the time, just so that there wouldn't be any effect on each other, the different ganses affecting each other there. So that's why I'd set it up. And so when we looked at seeding it, so after day one, I would take some of the seeds out of those test tubes and then use them to plant. And then obviously I put those test tubes back again so that they can continue to sit in those jars for the next few days. And then what I did was I had sown the seeds. So I'd sown a row of what I'd call my treated seeds, and then a row of untreated seeds as a sort of a standard, just to see, to be able to compare. So I did this seeding sort of over the next, again, after 5 days, I did exactly the same thing. I took all the seeds out, seeded, and created another standard batch. And then those tubes had stayed in those glass bottles for the 10-day period. And then I took more of those seeds out and planted them. So I got a huge amount of different times. So the duration was 1, 5, and 10 days, and exposed to the different fields of the different GANS materials and quite a variety of different seeds as well. So you can see there, it was photo on the left where they'd started germinating, and it was about a week later on the photo on the right. So there's just some more photographs showing you. So this whole batch on the table was all the seedlings that we had ended up planting out. Okay, so then just a couple of more close-up photographs. And if we look at the photograph on the left, you can see there's 2 rows of the green lettuce, 2 rows of red lettuce, and 2 rows of kale. So the row with the white tag is the row which were the seeds exposed to the fields of the different ganses. And as you could see, there was the picture of the sea gans with that particular variety. The picture on the right, we've got the bok choy, again, green lettuce and red lettuce. And when you look at the 2 rows, 1 treated, 1 untreated. So as you can see at this stage, just visually one could see that there's no difference in the seeds. Not all of them germinated, but didn't really notice any major difference between those that were treated and untreated. The seeds that I always use is always sort of heirloom variety seeds, so their germination rates are always around about 70–80%. Okay, so that was after day 1 or 1 day, and then these photographs here show the 5-day period. And again, here we've got kale, beetroot, and lettuce, if you look at the photograph on the left. And the photograph on the right, with both of them with the CO2 GANs. Here we've got our type soy. That's the beetroot, and then the lettuce. The photo on the left was the rocket that you see in the middle. So again, you see not much difference between those that were sort of exposed to the fields and those that weren't. Here's just another photograph of different plants exposed to the zinc oxide GANS for 5 days. Okay, so what I've done was I decided to plant them all on the same day, even though they had been seeded 10 days apart. So they all went into one of my systems there, as you can see, all planted on the same day with their tags, so I could at least identify where and what they were. And this was, there was about 63 days from seeding, which is all normal time frame from when you seed to when we are sort of eligible to harvest, big enough to harvest. So in this trough, we've planted all the seeds that were exposed to the fields for 1 day, 5 day, and 10 day. We planted them all on the same day into that system, and they were all then harvested on that same day as well. So what we had noticed, and it's pretty obvious with when you look at the pictures, and even when I'll go back to this picture as well. When you look at this picture, you can see there was no real noticeable difference on those seeds that had been treated and the seeds that hadn't been treated. One could not compare any differences. And again here, when we've got with at the seedling stage, there was no real difference that we had picked up at all. So what we had sort of found and sort of came to the conclusions that when we did harvest our lettuce at that time was there was no difference in the color that we had observed between the two in terms of height and growth. Also no difference, the health of the plant or its weight. So nothing, the seeds exposed to these fields had not had any change on the seed itself compared to our control seeds. So what we had discovered then was the seeds exposed to just the fields of the GANs show no effect or changes, which confirms what the seeds actually do, in that the seeds are designed to protect themselves from all the fields in the environment until water is added to break through this protective layer. Many a times we'll see in our garden that all of a sudden in certain strange places that we'll see plants coming up from seeds, but we've never had those in that area before, or they've only come up once a year. So in that area, so the seeds are there, protect themselves from the different environments, from the different fields. And this also explains why certain seeds can sit dormant for years until those right conditions are created to allow for the germination. And what we need to do to make an impact with the seeds is to actually soak the seeds with the GANS water, liquid water, plasma water, to allow the fields to penetrate through this protective layer of the seed. And obviously the GANS water is the key to that. And I'll show you later on one or two of the other experiments that we have done. But the point from this experiment was that we had shown that how the seeds have that protective layer and they protect themselves from the environmental fields. Now, when we talk of, we had exposed these to particular environmental magnetic gravitational fields from the different GANS materials. But when you equate that to seeds being out in the open or in the field, they are also exposed to these magnetic gravitational fields from the earth and from the sun. And so they're able to remain dormant and not affected by these fields until certain conditions are achieved. So it was a nice experiment to sort of lead into try and understand a bit more detail on how the seed operates and what's really involved in how internal operation of a seed is. So are there any questions at that stage? Has anybody else done something similar?
And I can remind everyone again, in Zoom here, you can raise your hand and I'll promote you to ask your question. I don't see any questions on the live streaming sites.
Okay.
Or in Zoom
Yes.
here, so.
I have done something similar myself with strawberries for the last couple of years, is feeding them GANS water. And I do have a control as well because I had them established before I used the GANS water. And I definitely noticed more fruit on the GANS water area than the non-GANS water area. So that's, I've always seen an improvement every time I use the GANS water compared to just straight water.
Yeah, using the water is very different to just the fields.
That's right, because I did try at the beginning putting in just a bottle, you know, of GANS water or GANS into the garden, and that didn't produce what I was expecting at all. It just stayed the same. So that's the same thing as you're trying to add fields into the garden, but it wasn't accepting them, right? There was no transfer mechanism in my understanding.
No. All right. So let's look at the understanding of these seeds, and I'm just trying to understand them from a new point of view, from the plasma point of view. First of all, we have to sort of acknowledge what seeds are, in that the seeds are essentially the children of the mother plant. And as we saw in the picture before, the seeds, and we've seen in our garden, the seeds come in all shapes and sizes and colors and varieties. And the plants are quite clever creatures in that they use the wind, and they use animals and the birds and the insects and even us as human beings to spread their children around to ensure the survival of its species. The seeds come from the flowers, the inside of fruits like avocado or apricot, or even outside of the fruit like the strawberry. And so nature, together with the plants, have found ingenious ways to ensure that the plants survive. And we see this with sort of the wind and the animals, and even birds taking seeds over long distances and dropping the seeds. So there's a huge sort of harmonious relationship between the plants and nature, everybody working together to ensure that the plants survive. So, you know, even though the plants can't get up and walk themselves, they make sure that their seeds are attractive to animals, so that they can be picked up and moved around and deposited in all over the place, so that the actual plants survive. And I wanted to show you this picture of our strawberry, because, as we said, seeds on a strawberry, you have the seeds on the outside, sitting on the outside. And in one of our experiments, we had played around with some strawberry plants. And here you could actually see the plant, a new plant, growing off the strawberry itself. So one of the seeds on the actual strawberry fruit had started germinating, and it started growing a whole new plant from the seed on top of the fruit. So this was a very interesting, very nice surprise that we had received. Okay, so when we look at the seeds, the mother flower, or the original mother plant, maintains a direct line of communication to all the other baby plants that germinated from her seeds. And this was sort of brought home to me quite strongly here in Australia, in that when you go and walk around in the bush and you speak to some of the local indigenous people, and they go into a forest and they will stand there and say, well, there's great-grandmother, and it's a huge, beautiful tree. And they say, well, there's all the children and the aunties and the uncles from in the forest. And at first I could never understand what she was meaning. But now when you understand that from one plant they are creating children all the time, and just like we have our connection to our children, so the plants maintain that connection to all their children that have gone off and nearby and even further away and seeded and created new plants. So there was always this connection. And when you look at plants from a different perspective as well, in terms of, plants produce these beautiful flowers, and it tells the animals in the insects worlds that basically they can come and eat them to ensure that they get the transfer of these seeds moved off and the preservation of life. So it's a way that the plants are quite giving of themselves. So, they create beautiful flowers and so that the animals come along and eat them, but they ensure that down the line, the animals will deposit those seeds in the paddock. So it's quite a beautiful sort of, one looks at a giving relationship that the plants have with all the other creatures around them. And another important point to remember for the seeds is that they are essentially dried GANs. So when we look at, we've always been told how nutritious seeds are and how good they are for us, and they contain all these different minerals and vitamins and different nuts and seeds. It's essentially because they are made of the different dried GANs materials. So when we eat them, we have that immediate connection with these dried GANs and GANs materials. So it's immediately able to, our body's able to interact and absorb these fields from the seeds themselves. When we look at I've just put a little very simple seed structure here. I know it goes into a lot more detail, but I just wanted to just keep it very simple. So when we have a look, we've always got the seed coat, that's the outer shell of the seed, and inside you've got the cotyledon, and the tiny little, on a lot of the seeds you'll see a tiny little pip, little point, and that's your radicle. As I said, there's a lot more complex structures, but I just wanted to keep it quite simple for those three. So when we look at this outer skin, outer layer of the seed, this outer layer, because it's the seed itself is made of dried GANs and different layers of GANs, it creates its own magnetical and gravitational field. So this outer skin is not just a skin, but it's a magnetical and gravitational field which we can see. And so this outer layer, depending on, and each seed will be different, this outer layer has a specific magnetic gravitational field strength. And it's this field strength which protects the seed from the environmental fields all around us. So we try to expose our seeds to the different fields of our different GANs materials, which had no effect on the seed, because the fields that we were exposing our seeds to had found no match to the actual fields of the seed itself, that protective layer, that skin of the seed. And so it's this layer, this magnetic gravitational field, which protects the seeds from fields of the earth and the sun until other factors are added to create those right conditions. And that other factor that we add is essentially the water that we add to the seed. And then we get the germination of the seed happening only when we add the water. Now, when we look at what the water is all about, it's the we know that the seed coating and the outer layer of the seed coating, it has a magnetic or gravitational field strength. So when we are bringing and exposing the seeds to the water, that's the field strength of the water, which is matching the field strength of the skin of the seed. And so we have that connection and interaction. And as the magnetic gravitational field strength of the water is slightly higher than the field strength of your skin around the seed, it's able to pulls the skin open, allowing for the germination. So it allows for that water to actually penetrate through. We then get the germination and the growth begins. So when we look at the water itself, composed of H2 and 2 hydrogens and 1 oxygen, we know that the oxygen plays the role of the gravitational, and it's the one that pulls open because it's highly gravitational. It pulls and opens that skin, so it's able to peel through the seed layer and get access inside. And now with the dried GANs being exposed to the water, it opens up, and so essentially we have the seed that goes from matter state to the GAN state, and we get the whole germination process happening. So it's the addition of the water to the seeds, which is that final key and interaction to basically break through those layers. And so when you look at the water, as we said, the oxygen is gravitational and carries this field information, which also explains another point in that we've also seen in our gardens that especially when you sort of cultivate wild gardens and you allow your plants to go to seed, a plant might seed, and you know that in that garden there's huge amounts of seed that have gone to the ground, and we will have rain, but that rain does not seem to activate those seeds. They don't seem to germinate at every instant of a rain. So when you look at an annual plant, it will only seem to germinate in summer, or some plants will only germinate in winter. Yet throughout the year they are exposed to rain, but they just won't germinate until those conditions are right. So what we have to bear in mind is that there are additional factors coming in. So the rain and the water is bringing in the fields from the environment. So we know that summer and winter and autumn and spring all have different magnetic gravitational fields. So it's this water which will have sort of fields of spring or summer. When that rains, then you get all the germination of those particular plants, because they then find that particular match. Those fields in the water, in the rainwater, find a match for those seeds. So we're able to now begin to explain a lot of different aspects and qualities of the seeds, and why some grow and why some don't grow, and why some seeds can sit around and dormant for years until those exact conditions are achieved to break through those outer layers, those outer fields of that seed coating. It's saying once that seed opens up and germination begins, it's the water itself also provides that initial energy, which is your hydrogens, for that whole germination process to get going. And so when we look at that seed, we've got your dried GANs inside, you've got your radicle, or the mother, that's the tip of most seeds. So it's this interaction of the fields of that tip of the seed with the interaction of the rest of the seed, which is your dried GANs. And now when we add water, it leads to that growth of the plant. So we get that interaction and flow of the fields between the two. So it's only when that water is allowed into the seed that we get this interaction between those two, and we get the life. And it's exactly the same as when we look at an egg. We can have the egg yolk And so it's the interaction of the magnetic fields of the sperm from the rooster and magnetic fields of the egg. And without that sperm from the rooster, we would not get life as a little chicken. But it's that third factor and that third interaction of that fields which then creates that life, just like in the seed. So as we've sort of seen that and shown above, is that it's the water which is the key for the seeds. And so that's why soaking your seeds in the GANS water produces such wonderful results. And that is the key for a lot of agriculture. Any questions?
How do you soak something like a lettuce seed that's quite small, or do you then place it in the soil and then water it or mist it or spray it with GANS water?
For the lettuce seeds, as you said, they are so tiny, and I did try in the beginning where you go and put them all into a little bowl of the GANS water, and then you spend the next 2 hours trying to fish them out and plant and plant them. If you've got a small little garden, it's fine. But for our scale, production scale, it became a useless exercise. So what I do is I seed all the seeds into those cups, and then I spray. And then I'll cover with the soil again. So that spraying is enough to provide the fields as well. Your bigger seeds, I'll show you later on. The bigger seeds, there we soak in the water because it's easier to then manage and handle.
Do you treat your beds with the GANS water? We have long dormant periods, so this year I'm treating my beds with the GANS water, and early, and putting the compost on, treating everything with GANS water, and then sort of covering it so that it doesn't completely dry out because we're in a drought right now.
Okay.
Does that make sense, or am I out of sequence here?
No, we've sprayed with a lot of our plants. We spray with the GANS water, and you can spray all the time because you're just adding to the fields of that plant. And it's the same if you're preparing your beds with the soils, and that is to add that GANS water into the soils, and so that you are adding those fields in, so that when you do get to the stage where you're planting, you can carry on spraying, carry on adding the water, but you are building those fields in that bed, in that garden bed. So yes,
I would imagine that it would boost the microbes and the microbial population as well.
It would, and that's what you're wanting, is you're wanting to build a very healthy soil structure, because there, that, as you say, you've got all the microbes, and your microbes are amino acid based, and so there's a lot of questions we have to ask, and I'm sure a lot of research will be done years down the line, is that the fields of the GANS, when we add that into the soil, or what effect are these fields having on the bacteria, being the amino acid based structure? Are they helping to make the soil bacteria healthy, or are the soil bacteria able to use some of these fields? And then in return and in relation, we have to try and figure out is the soil bacteria, it's a living creature itself, and so it's also giving off fields. Are those fields interacting with the roots of the plants and providing fields back to the roots of the plants? Because it's all in a cycle. So there's still many, many questions unanswered.
Well, I've done some research on that, but I don't think it's quite the right time to bring that in. But it's really the plant that's always in control.
Yeah, and there's no right or wrong way. You know, with agriculture, it's actually quite nice and it's quite easy. You think and you try and you do what you think, you know, is going to work, and try, and you just try it and just notice the results. A lot of the times the results you'll see are quite subtle. In the beginning, when you start on your gardens, or even agriculture, you see quite a big difference, because it's when you first start introducing all your different ganses, you see a big change in your garden. Then once they're sort of pretty well established with all this GANS material, then when you start playing around and trying further in different combinations, it then becomes quite difficult to see any subtle changes, because it's that initial change which is quite dramatic. And then when you play around after that, that's what we've found, our experience is you battle to see any major improvements until we, you know, really develop this technology a lot further.
Thank you, Nicholas. Mark, you had your hand up.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep.
Hello, everyone. I was thinking that we're using the CO2, my understanding, well, at first I thought the plant was drinking it or whatever, but now I understand that we're creating conditions for the plant to absorb more amino acids. Mr. Keshe said, like when you have cut flowers, a rose, and you get that package that comes with it, it won't do anything if the rose or the plants don't have any leaves on them. The package doesn't do much anyway. It's got sugar, whatever. But if you use the CO2 and the plant, then the vase has leaves on it, it's tricking the plant into believing it's still existing and therefore absorbing more amino acids. So it's using the magnetic plasmatic field to do things. Yes?
Yes, you're correct. You know, we are creating that environment around the plant. It's, you know, the GANS material and CO2 that we're using, whether it's on a plant that's already grown or we treat it from the very seed stage, we are slowly changing those different that environment around the plant. So with CO2, we are changing that magnetic gravitational fields around the plant. So you're correct, yes. No more questions, Flint?
I don't see any coming in here.
Oh. It's an easy topic, you see.
Yeah. I guess what?
It's Mark. I noticed on your sorry, go ahead, John.
Carry on.
Yesterday I was talking to an agricultural engineer, and she is producing, it's a lady, she is producing a mixture of guano and different additives for the plants and liquid GANs, and they're spraying this on the plantations, you know, on the soil, because there are many hundreds of hectares. Is this recommended, or is it preferably to just use the liquid GANs?
John, we have to try everything. You know, I'm not here to say, you know, we must. That. Yeah.
Sorry,
you know,
that's what I've told this person, but I want to know your experience?
We've, you know, when you're looking at making up your own different fertilizers, I know in the past that Keshe was saying, you know, it's the actual, when you look at the fertilizer, whether it's chicken manure or any manure, it's the actual amino acids in that manure which is doing the job. So by, you know, adding amino acids through, you know, the bat droppings, then with your plasma water, it'll only be beneficial.
Yes, but you're also giving it all the contaminants and hormones using on those animals.
Well, it depends on, you know, where you're getting it from. But yes, you know, that can be full of, depending on where you're getting your animal compost from. But that's a whole nother issue, you know. If you don't want to go down that road, then you just use your plasma water.
Yeah, that's my idea. That's why I'm treating a plantation here on our green tea, the yerba mate, and we're spraying it with only plasma water. But this plantation is a yearly basis thing, so it takes time to see the effects.
Yeah,
and tea plantations also.
That's the problem with the agricultural experiments, and is that it takes time. You know, and often 1 or 2 seasons to really see dramatic changes. So it's not an instant thing.
And the climate also is playing against us, no? Because it's gone haywire.
Yes, it does. You know, I mean, for example, where we are, and we've been here 6 years, there's no one spring or one summer that's been exactly the same as the year before. In terms of seasons, so it's becoming more and more difficult for farmers to farm because of the changing environments, and that's where using this GANS material certainly helps, because you know we've seen it with during the heat and during winter time. It helps because you're creating that environment around the plant, and that environment is making the plant stronger. It's adding to the feels of the plant itself, so the plant can withstand a lot of these environmental conditions, you know, and the weather itself, you know, and different changing climates is just changing in the fields, and so we're just allowing the plant to interact and manage with those fields.
And what experiences have you with the seawater ormus and seawater itself? Have you tried all those different alternatives?
Yes, and it's still a mystery to me, because we've made, and we do make a lot of our sea GANs because we're by the coast and we use it for our agriculture. So we've made some ourselves, and there are quite a few suppliers here in Australia who make what they call the ormus, and we've used some of that as well. And yeah, it's a difficult one, and it's a whole probably debate on itself as to what is the difference between the two. But it's essentially the minerals from the ocean which you're adding in for the agriculture. And you know, but as you say, we don't know what's in that seawater, so you just don't know what you are dealing with when it comes down to the seawater, and that's why it's, you know, we use it for our agricultural purposes only.
Yes, this lady is doing it. She's in the middle of a land, but they have some seawater springs in the middle of these lands, and they're testing with that also. So sometime later on, I'll give you some ideas on what these people are testing out.
Okay, interesting to have that seawater in the middle. Hey.
Yes, there are several regions where the sort of salt seawater springs out of the earth. So that's another strange thing we have in the zone, in different zones here in down south. Huh?
The agriculture is not as glamorous as health and the energy, and so over the years it has been ignored, and but it's nice to see a lot more people starting to work with the GANS materials on the land and in their gardens, because the more results that we can get in from everybody around the world, the more it just adds to and confirms the importance of using the materials on agriculture.
Yeah, and experience here also, this lady is having a hell of a big problem with all the big companies like Monsanto, Bayer, Syngenta, and what have you. They're sort of reacting and driving around the bend.
I think that's globally.
Jim,
Yeah.
it's Mark. Oh, sorry, John. Go ahead. I thought you were finished.
No, that's finished. Go ahead.
No, I just wanted to. Oh, gee, now I just lost my train of thought. No, Jim, I wanted to thank you for that series. I watched all the parts. I'm sure I can watch them 100 times. But what I took away with that, and I mentioned to Lisa, was the shelf life, the phenomenal shelf life that you achieved. I mean, with refrigeration, correct?
Yes.
Yes, but that was a phenomenal discovery or proof.
Yeah, that was a very big surprise for us. Often we find that I will set out with a certain purpose to do certain experiments, and often they end up failing. But it's what you get out of the failures that is actually more important. And that one I'd set out to prove, that seed soaked with plasma water would grow better than the seeds soaked in plain water, which I never achieved. But it taught us so much from that, and the shelf life was incredible. And it transpires into not just the shelf life, but when people eat the fruit or vegetables that's been grown with this plasma water, because they're now so much healthier. And your shelf life is sort of gives you an indication of the healthiness and vibrancy of the plant. Longer shelf life means the plant is healthy and full of nutrition for us. And so at this stage, while we are still all eating plants and animals and meat, if we were to at least make the agriculture or the animals healthier with the plasma water, it transpires into what we're eating as healthier food. And so hopefully at least it will help to eventually get us all off the cycle of eating, because we'll be eating less and less and less over the time, because the stuff is becoming so much more nutritious for us. So it's a good start.
Jim? Yeah, no, I noticed recently, I thought about, we're eating animals, we're eating plants, but then Mr. Keshe said we're feeding also on emotions, but that's a different class, but very interesting. We all think of animals and plants, but there's an emotional feeding that goes on too. And not positive sometimes.
Yeah.
Jim, have you tried spraying in the supermarkets with the different products? Does it? Do you notice a betterment in the shelf life also?
Sorry, John, with doing what in the supermarkets?
Spraying the vegetables or the fruit on the stands. Do they also? I've noticed I've kept some fruit that only lasts about a day, and I've kept this fruit under GANS water, and they've been there for 3 weeks, and they haven't deteriorated anything at all.
Yeah, I think it does. I haven't per se, done any experiments with supermarkets with them spraying GANS waters. But when you understand, one first has to understand what is decay of plants and why do plants decay in our environment. Is that the plants plants or fruit or vegetables they are live living beings, and so they're also constantly giving off fields into the environment. And when they start degrading and rotting, it's because they are giving too much fields into that environment. And so they're constantly losing the fields. So when we are putting those fruits and vegetables in a different environment, would be CO2 environment, different magnetic gravitational field, so we are essentially possibly slowing down that interaction of those plants, vegetables losing fields to the environment, because if they find the match and come into balance, then they're not losing their fields. And so they're able to maintain essentially their condition from when you started with. So it all comes down to the loss of the fields. That's what we see as the rotting of the fruit, because it's your plants are losing fields into the environment. But if we can change that environment around the plants or around the fruit and vegetables, then we won't get that loss of fields into that environment. So
yeah, I've offered GANS water to a couple of markets so they could spray all their vegetables and fruits, but they sort of don't believe in what you're saying. And I said, well, do the experience. And they're reticent to doing this. But if they manage to conserve their shelf life for 10 times more, or even duplicate the time the products live in a natural, nice state, they realize they can lower their margins. So, because that's all on to doing with all the garden products or whatever, they last such a short time on a shelf life that they lose a hell of a lot of money, and their margins have to be uplifted.
Well, if you imagine how much food is grown and lost just because of transportation and distances in transportation, just to get it to the market, how much food is wasted and lost. So if we're able to get to the source of it and start growing with the plasma waters, at least, the farmers will probably be able to grow less because they're able to get at least more, most of their produce to the market without it, half of it rotting on the way, or losing half of it due to time and distance and travel.
They could promote this also, say, well, my products last very much longer.
Well, people will, we'll start choosing, when our own fruit and vegetables that we know are healthier. When you go into, we're learning about all the fields and the energies, and so we can translate that by going when you go into a grocery shop and you interact with your tomatoes, interact with the carrots that you're wanting to buy, and see, you'll be able to sense which ones are more healthy. Don't buy by the look of it now. Start feeling the energies of those fruits and vegetables, and you buy accordingly.
Yeah, the other day I heard, I think it was you or somebody else, mentioned that the carrots were much harder. Now, if the carrot is not springy. It's sort of if you bend it, it cracks. It sounds much healthier, also, doesn't it?
Yeah, the carrots weren't me. I don't grow, haven't played with carrots on growing. Might have been somebody in Gatwa's class.
Ah, that must have been, yeah.
Jim, this is Christian from Germany. May I ask something?
Yes, please.
Okay, I have got orchards, tall trunk trees, a lot of. And last year, we had in the springtime, we had frost. It was very cold. So all blossoms were frozen. I had no fruits. And I expect this year to be the same situation in next month or April probably, yes. So it will be cold then again probably. And I would like to do something about that. I would like to protect them with some GANs or something. And I would like an advice or an idea from you, please.
You could spray with your GANS water, and then you can also try what we've tried. You know, we've all made the rings with there's little plastic rings that we put around our wrist or things like that, filled with the GANS water. So make some rings and put them around branches of trees. We've done that. We had an old apricot tree. Oh, it's an old tree. And we put 2 rings around it, you know, on different branches, so that we made the rings different strengths, so that we could at least create a flow between the 2. And because this tree was so old and it was full of, it was like a scale, and so we put the ring on, and it took a long time. It probably took over a year, 18 months. But the tree started reviving, and that whole sort of one side of the tree where we had put the 2 rings had really started growing again quite vigorously. But unfortunately, when we had a lot of rain, that side of the tree actually broke off because of all the new leaves and the growth on that side of it. And because it was an old tree, it couldn't handle the weight. So that whole half of the tree had fallen down. So, but we had found that those rings were quite effective. It took a long time. It's a very old tree, but I would try that. Just putting some rings around the branches.
This is too many trees, so I cannot do it with every tree. Is there also? I will start doing this anyway. I already have some tubes here for it. Do you use CO2 GANs in them, or?
Yeah, I used CO2, which was many CO2 and zinc.
Yeah.
That we had put together, and you can do some CH3. But even if you created, I'm just thinking out aloud, if you created some rings, and if you created a different strength of some rings, and you placed those rings, you know, not necessarily on every tree, but in a wide area, just covering a couple of trees, then you might find that if you can create a flow between your rings, you're covering quite a big area of your trees without having to put a ring on each and every one tree.
Yes, a good idea, I think. I was thinking already of Mr. Gatwa's invention of those star formations.
Yeah.
But well, I'm looking in every direction because I feel I have to do something now. I cannot spray every tree, but why do you put it onto the not onto the trunk, those rings, but into the ground somewhere?
On the branches. We just put on
branches,
1 or 2
yes.
branches. Yeah.
Why do you do that?
And you know, do what Dr. Gatwa has done as well, and place some bottles around as well. You know, try whole different combinations in different parts of your orchard, and
yes, yeah.
See, it'd be very good.
Oh, I would love to have fruits this year. Thank you.
We'll wait for your results.
Klaus Dieterbauer, do you have a question?
Hello, Flint. Hello, Jimmy. Hello together.
Hey, Klaus, how are you?
I'm fine. Are we too?
Good. Yes.
Okay. Yes. The last time we had in Austria, I think 30 degrees difference the last 12 to 14 days. The weather is very interesting.
Crazy.
But what I want to say is I work on a big experiment with partners from me in the agriculture section. And today and this year, we have to study the difference between my old practice with the biomagnetics from the minerals and from the different compost from the soil, in between to the work with the plasma. And what I see is that the plants not so much bring in the fields. There's also a bigger part of the material side. And what I want to experience this year is how high is this factor from the field side, and how high is this factor from the nutrition side, from the meta state. And so we can say what is real. What we say is when we work with plants, and you know I work with big farmers, and we make these biophoton emissions, and we see, yes, the plants lose biophotons, and as you say, they lose also the fields. And so we can see how much is this what come in and come out, and that is what we to look in this year. And I hope we can work on different states together and look what are your results and what are the results on my side. And I think it would be a very interesting experience to look how these things really work. Well, a little bit is in the dark, and I want to bring in a little bit more light into this.
Yeah, it's the whole plant kingdom is still quite a mystery. I'm still trying to unpack it from a plasma point of view, in the interaction of the field, because you know, there's just so many factors that come into play, and so it'll be nice to get your results and your results, Christian, and because the more results, say, we get, then we can at least compare and confirm a lot of you know, proof of concept for a lot of products. So it will be nice.
Yes, I see it also so. And in this area, we have very good prepared for the last 10 to 12 years, and we have the results. We have the results from the minerals. We have the results from the all the insights in the plants and in the seeds. And so we can study with the other side. And there are, I think, 30 to 40 hectares where we have not worked the last years. And this is, I think, 5 or 6 kilometers far away from the other experiment area. And so we can see how is the influence from these things.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Well, no, thank you, Klaus. And I think you brought up another point as well, is with the agriculture, it's so difficult to do direct comparison experimentation, where you're wanting to compare one, you know, as Gato has explained many times, one bed of crop exposed to the GANS waters and another bed that's not, because, you know, in typical agriculture, you're wanting to plant one next to each other to get results, whereas we know that the fields interact quite a wide area, so one has to grow quite far away from your experimental plot. And so it becomes quite difficult to do the direct comparison. And the only way that I see forward is to compare to historical results. You know, as you're going to do, Klaus, you know, farmers that have been growing for 20 years and they know that they're getting certain yield of crops off their fields, and they know what's, they understand what they're growing and what they're getting. So if we start introducing the plasma, they'll very soon and very quickly realize that they are getting a better yield or this or that, purely because they can compare it to historical records. And I think that's the only way that we are going to be able to compare a lot of and do a lot of experiments that way, is just to compare to historical data.
Yes, I see exactly the same way.
Without sort of one-on-one comparison, next to each other.
I put a YouTube link in the chat, and it's a beautiful presentation on the ancient megaliths, and then certain megalithic or small structures that they begin to use in agriculture. And what I am seeing that is happening for me is I've been working with this and listening to these teachings, which are so helpful, is that nature, when it's working properly, when its environments are healthy, the plasma fields are all at work. And Jim, you brought a lot to understand about what we're seeing in nature that is working with the plasma. Well, it's clearly that these megalithic structures were agriculture in nature, and they must have been working with the plasma fields. And that gives some scientific understanding at what was working with there. So in this YouTube video that I just put on the chat, it shows how incredible these influences have been in certain situations of present day agriculture. And they must also be working with the plasma fields. So as we put up towers or PowerPoints or something like that, a stone or something like that, and somehow include the GANS water in it. Or if we create a pyramid formation, we call it, and we put that in the corners of our fields or around the outside of our orchard, or at certain key trees, we choose the trees that are the leader trees of the orchard. Which trees are your leaders? Which ones are the ones that send out to all the other trees, hey, you guys, it's time to bloom, or that kind of thing. Or even also we know that there are elementals, elemental beings that are a part of the plant kingdom. And it's my thought, of course, I have no research on this, that they also respond to our participation. And when we participate by bringing in PowerPoints or nodal points with the GANSes and the GANS water, or spraying it with the GANS water, I think we're also activating and inspiring the divas and the elementals, as well as all these incredible microbe populations, the trillions and trillions and trillions of population. And the fungus that's underneath is a communication system. So I imagine in your orchard, you have a fungal communication system throughout the whole orchard. So if we could communicate with that network of fungi, then with the GANSes somehow, and with intention, I wouldn't be surprised if you would get those, get the trees to bloom later and miss the frost, or to be healthier so they can withstand the frost, or something just in their field environment. But I encourage you to listen to this video, whoever's interested, it's quite entertaining, as well as I think there's something to learn from our pyramid formations and where we place them and how we place them. So that's some thoughts.
Thanks, Nicholas. Yeah, it's a lot of this all comes into play, and I often think as well is when we look at the agriculture and the plant world and all living things here on Earth, is ultimately, do we then need all our GANSs and everything? Because surely we can work with the plant world ourselves and create these environments for the plants. But, are these GANSs also just tools along the way for us to learn to work with nature? So very, very many questions, and we're still finding the answers.
Well, yes, and the question that's been coming up for me lately in different situations, not just the plant environment, human environment, healing environments and all, is when we see something working and we say, or somebody says, oh, look, this tool really works, this little device really works, or these supplements really work, and it's affecting the vitamins and it's affecting the matter state. And I'm saying, well, we look at it and we think it's affecting the matter state, but just like the leaves and all, what it is actually doing is it's affecting the fields, and the fields are affecting the matter state. So we can actually, if we can understand what's at work, go directly to the work with the fields. So just in the thinking, it changes. So, oh, it looks like this pill did something. Well, but it has to be somehow at the core, it's the fields that are actually doing it.
Well, is it the pill or is it you? So, yes.
Jim?
Yes.
Yes. When you cut the lettuce, I don't think you pull up the whole thing and distribute it, right? You cut the leaves off, right?
Yes.
Okay. So there's a soul in those leaves. It still has life. Yes?
Yes.
Okay. So what you've done is well, if you have the lettuce in the refrigerator, it's giving up its energy. It's slowly turning brown and then black and then into mush. Yeah. So
yes.
you have delayed the separation of the soul from the plant. Yeah? And I'm thinking, if we look at human beings, in other words, that plant had so much energy, it took so much longer to give up its energy. Now, in a human being, when you have a disease, you don't die, your soul doesn't separate because of the disease, it separates because of the lack of energy in the body. So by using the GANs, can we delay, even though we are GANs and the fields are where we're headed, but with the GAN, can you maybe delay the separation of the soul in a human by using the GANs? Does that correlate?
It's a good question. I think it certainly helps, but I think what we're learning from the soul perspective is our soul really dictates that's the stronger one. But it certainly, the GANSs and that certainly help us on the physical level. But I think that ultimate decision still comes down to our soul. But yeah, it poses interesting questions.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Generally, we use like CO2 and copper and so forth to purify water.
Yes.
And remove the bacteria and organisms that would be harmful to us when we drink it. And how does that not do the same thing when you use the water to water your plants with in the soil? Would that not kill off some bacteria in the soil or disinfect things, so to speak?
The copper GANs, I think a lot of those, from what I remember, the best results were from the copper, were they not? I can remember.
For disinfecting, yeah.
We've only used a little bit of copper.
Yeah, because generally copper in plants, you'll kill them off, won't you? You're not supposed to use copper GANs with plants.
We've tried. We've had placed a bottle of one of our systems, a bottle of copper GANs into our waters now, because we had so many problems with frogs and tadpoles, and we haven't. It obviously comes down to the how much, but we haven't seen any detrimental effect on our lettuce at this stage from the copper. And so it all comes down to how much you're going to be using. But all we're trying to do with the copper in the water is to create that environment in the water that's not too conducive for frogs and tadpoles. So we don't want to make it too happy for them. But it hasn't had an effect on the plants, and it just comes down to the ratios and how much.
So you don't want to raise frogs?
No, that's not what we wanting to farm. Just to explain why I'm talking about the frogs, and that is the unintended consequence of us using the GANS materials. And so we opened up this was quite a while back, all our netting, because here in Australia there's so many pests and bugs. And so we'd opened up all our netting. We grow everything out in the open because we're using all the different GANs, and we don't have a problem with the pests at all. But it's made it so inviting that we had a whole lot of frogs come and live in our water. And so then they started breeding tadpoles, and we had huge amounts of tadpoles, but then they all start eating our roots of the lettuce. So we had lost weeks and weeks of production just because of creating a nice, happy environment. But it was happy enough for the frogs to come and also make it home. So, the environment was too perfect for everybody to come and live with it. So now we try to create and put a little bit of copper into the water so that we don't want to kill the frogs, but we're wanting to make it so that environment is not as conducive to them coming in and laying eggs, and I'd rather go somewhere else then. So it's always an interesting take with nature.
One of the questions, this is a big question that I had about using the copper at all with the in the soil, is that the question is can the copper, if it's going to kill or neutralize or limit microbial populations, can it distinguish between the beneficial microbes and the pathogenic microbes? And so that's a question about using that or silver water or anything that tends to kill or limit microbial activity. If you're trying to encourage beneficial microbes, for instance, maybe you don't want to use your copper oxide GANs in the soils, or even with the plants, because the microbes are, all over the leaves and everything else. They're the little workhorses for the plants, because as I understand it, the plants will send out a hormone or a kind of a plant kind of hormone for what it needs, and the microbes then will draw that from the soil and make it bioavailable to the roots of the plants. Now that's my old way of thinking. Now I'm saying, well, it must be something different than that. It must be there's this call going out, but it all must have something to do with the fields, and not just the transfer of nutrients. So somewhere, this new thinking now has to do with the plasma fields, and I haven't quite integrated that yet, but I think it's quite interesting. But it's clearly the plant that's in control. It says, I need this, and if it's available in the soil, then it'll be produced. And well, I don't need that, or I have a fungi in my root, and I need something to neutralize it, and it sends a message out. And if it's available there, it'll come neutralize it, or if the plant's healthy, it'll send out a hormone or whatever it sends out, a plantamone, I don't know what you call it, and it will then neutralize that problem if the plant is healthy. So there's something going on in these roots, in the soil, and as well as in the air that we've been studying with the day-night sun interaction with the plants. It's very exciting.
Jim, well, just answer whatever you've got pending.
I just wanted to bring in there with the the copper, using it in the soils, and whether the copper would distinguish between, say, the good bacteria or the bad bacteria. One has to look at everything from plasma point of view, and if you look at the copper itself, has a certain field strength, and so if the copper is introduced in a big way into the soil, it's going to interact with certain bacteria if it finds that match with that bacteria. So whether it's going to diminish the fields of that bacteria or not will depend on the field strength of each of those different bacteria. So, one has to start looking at all these aspects of how this interacts purely on a field basis. And so it's a lot of research that needs to be done for the next 50, 100 years in this, but all we're doing is raising all the questions. So I think a lot of the good scientists can come up after us and maybe answer them in a couple of years' time.
Jim?
Yeah.
Have you ever read Victor Schauberger's experiments? Because he experimented a lot with copper, dealing with trees and soil, and his son made a factory, was building or manufacturing all the tools for gardening out of copper, and their experiments showed that whenever you plowed the earth with a copper plow, it was very much better than plowing with a steel plow. A steel plow sort of deteriorates the earth, and a copper plow gives it a very good advantage, and all the agricultural part started growing immediately. The same as trees. Mr. Keshe said that if you want to kill a tree, just put a copper nail into it. But according to Schauberger's experience, whenever you cut a tree trunk with a copper axe, it would instantaneously grow again. And if you do it with a steel axe, it would die.
Very interesting.
Victor Schauberger was
Yeah.
he was I don't know if you know his history. In the 1920s, he was he looked after what do you call it when you got a hell of a lot of many trees, a bosque,
Forest.
forest. He was a forest guard in Germany, and he experimented with all of to do with the water vortexes and what have you. He even built flying saucers that worked on water for Hitler during the war. So he was very advanced in all the technology to do with water and copper, because he used all copper in all his pipes when he experimented with the filters and vortex machines and what have you.
Yeah, there's so much old technology that has sort of been lost and gone by the wayside. And you know, what we have to start doing is taking this old technology, but trying to understand it from a plasma perspective to see how we can explain all these different effects that they were getting, and from using our understanding of the fields in the plasma. But there's a lot of valuable stuff there.
We have one last question here from Brett.
Jim, do you use any type of any other type of salts in making your CO2, regards to magnesium or potassium or calcium or anything like that?
Yeah, I made a CO2, so it was a normal plate, copper plate, zinc plate, but instead of having the salt solution, I had gotten some of, I'm trying to think what it was. I think it was magnesium nitrate as one of the fertilizers. No, sorry. I tried magnesium nitrate and potassium nitrate as a fertilizer. So I mixed 10% of that, because it is a salt-based fertilizer, in my water, and I put my plates in there. And we made quite a bit of, it looked like the CO2 from the potassium nitrate, and nothing from the magnesium nitrate. There was just nothing. But the potassium nitrate produced quite a nice, and very quickly. So we've been playing around with that as well, just to see the effects, but it's still early stages.
Thank you.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, Estella.
Good morning.
Morning.
I have a 5-acre place in California, and we moved 2 years ago from the city. And I have my husband and a daughter and the boyfriend of my daughter. We've been farming organic for the last 2 years, and it's been a lot while I was trying to learn plasma. But anyway, I want to share that what this guy, my husband and my daughter's boyfriend, they been studying and doing composting. And what I learned with the plasma, and especially my daughter's boyfriend, he meditates. He communicates with the plants. He's very nice young man, and the way how they make the compost is all with what's it called? Cangrejos. How do you call cangrejos? Sea fish. They make it like a soup of all these organic substances and calcium, and they have it in water and bubbling for over a certain amount of hours, and then they go and they spray the plants, and also to put it in the you know, they feed the plants, and they were able to build good bacteria in the plants, while our neighbors' plants, they were being eaten. Ours completely survive. And by the way, it's cannabis. And I've been the spectator, you know, and while we work very much from the spiritual aspect of being grateful for the plants and expect that the plants provide what the plants wants to provide, not to being, you know, thinking and having a huge plant. So we just wanted to co-create with the plants, and the plants were beautiful at the end of last year before I came to South America. And I wanna share that we survive a rain of ice. How you call it that, John? You know, it was a
Hail?
storm. Yeah, yes. And I was sounding and praying on that one. So I just, after all what we've been learning, and we survived that one. And I'm thinking it's the plasma. And this year when I come back, we're gonna I talk to my husband. I've been telling him about the plasma, and I want he learn with me the agriculture to do. We have a pond full of frogs, like you were talking about frogs. We have huge amount of frogs. It's like heaven where we live. It's beautiful. And also I learned about what John was talking about. I read I'm learning sustainability, and you know, I don't know too much because I'm a city person. But I saw all those tools and using copper, and also I saw another video in France, a guy who put a strings of copper along the line of seeds. You know, when it started to have at the beginning, you know, growing from the seed, and the way of the conducting of the electromagnetic field of the earth is what helps make healthier and bigger the plants. So I just want to add that, which I think is the plasma field of the people, and the intention is really what, you know, helps, you know, when you don't have the plasma water.
Yeah, it is our intention. You know, as I say, a lot of these are tools for us at the time being, but it all comes down to our intention when we're growing with the plants, and the plants will respond to us.
Yeah,
if we give them the love and the attention, then they respond back, and that's all that they do need. You know.
Yeah, the famous green thumb. You know, the people are very caring and communicate. They love to be in that garden, touching the soil. That's what really makes a big thing, big deal.
No, that's what it's all about. You know, we are feeding the plants our energies, and the plants are feeding us with the plants' energies. So it's, you know, it's a give and take, and you connect. You have that connection with your plants, and it's a loving connection. They will thrive. They will absolutely thrive.
Stella, that's an interesting idea you threw out. Putting a thin copper wire along a line of plants and see what happens. I'll give this idea to Ruben also for his yerba mate.
Yeah, I truly believe. I think the copper wire. Um, I think the plants are like humans. I mean, if copper is good for the body, it probably help to balance all the energetics of the body, the human body. So probably it's the same with the plants.
Yeah, very interesting point you brought up there. I think we can all do a lot of different experiments now, with, trying different options with that as well.
Well, I'm coming back on next week on the 20th, and I have a box of lot of non-GMO seeds, and this year I feel healthy now to go back. That's why I came to South America to get well, and now stay in the cold winter in America. So I'm gonna start my garden. So I'm probably gonna. That's why I was happy when I said soaking seeds with liquid plasma water. So this is for me. Because it's the time to start to do that, springtime.
Yeah. Perfect time.
Yeah. And about the copper tools, many people say, well, but copper tools are too soft. Well, very few people know how to temper copper, but you could use bronze, which is a mixture of copper and zinc, because zinc is also good for the emotional part of the plants. And the made out of what do you call it? Not copper, bronze is easier to temper. They're the hardening of the tools, the cutting side of the tool is easier to keep with the effect you need for it.
Can I add something, please?
Go ahead.
You need to understand that the plants have emotion and they decide if they want to grow or not. If you put all the elements there for her to grow without zinc, that you are forcing her. But if you put with it zinc, and then she decide if she want to grow in this environment or not. And that is I noticed with my plants. When I put them only CO2 and nitrogen, they are flourishing, but not quite much. But when I put also the zinc for it, some of them died and some of them was really beautiful and huge, because I think the zinc is playing here a big role. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Jalal. Yeah, we've always used.
Can I say something, guys? Do you guys know muscle testing?
Yes, heard of the concept.
Okay. I think we need to communicate at the soul level with the seeds and the plants and see what they want. And try.
Well, obviously that is the direct point of contact, and that's where we will all have to go, is to connect with. It doesn't matter whether it's a plant or a insect or a bacteria in the soil. We just have to start learning to connect with all of them through our soul, connect our soul with their soul. And that's what it's all about.
Right. I sometimes ask myself when I use my body, is this good enough, or is this good for me? And maybe when we do the plasma and all this, we need to maybe ask the percentage, is this good, or does it need more? And try to connect with the fields that, find a way to, or do it, ask a question and see if the universe return the answer. Use our feeling body, I don't know, just throw it in a way like maybe we need to try to do soul talk.
Well, the experiment I have with the mosquitoes, I've never bothered the mosquitoes. I just let them feed off me. I used to. But for the last year, as I've got so much plasma energy around me, I find the mosquitoes have grown bigger, but they just land on my skin, but they don't bite me anymore. They just sort of absorb the energy and they go away. They don't bother anymore.
It's a nice story. Thanks, John.
Yeah. Different experiences we all have with different creatures, no?
Yes, yeah. Let's all get, it's we have to all get back and connect back with nature. Nature's our biggest teacher, and the more we connect with nature in however we can do it, the better. Help us understand this plasma just by observing nature and seeing how nature does it, because it's in the beauty of nature that everything is done so effortlessly.
That's a nice test, John. I think we're able to tell if our fields are strong. When the mosquito sees they're strong, they don't bite us. Only when the fields are weak will they bite us, I think.
We had a couple more. We had a couple more people with their hands up here. Go ahead, Boris.
Yes, I wanted to add something about the copper. And you mentioned that put copper in the soil. I saw once a test about this, and they put copper bars along the plantations, and I think on one side copper, and the other side it was steel, and then the plants, they grow better. And another thing about liquid plasma copper, I made an experience I would pass to you. You do have fish tanks too, do you?
Yes, I did, yes.
Yes, and I have an aquarium I found on the garbage, and and in the end of last year I put water and I make a stone and put fishes, 14 fishes, but I don't have much experience with fishes, so there was one was contaminated with fungus, like a parasite, and they start to die and had a strange comportment and everything. So two species had some babies, and I could take some babies out and put in another tank, but they was contaminated too. They had like salt on the skin, and started to have a strange comportment. And so I put in 1 liter of the small tank of fish, 20 milliliters of
Are you there, Boris? Are you gone?
Hello?
Yes.
Did you say Thomas?
No, he said Boris, but.
Oh, okay. So sorry, because I had a problem here with my microphones, so I wasn't sure. No, I'm waiting. I don't want to interrupt Boris.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, we'll get to you in a little bit there, Thomas. Boris, you still there? Were you finished? Hello, Boris.
I came back.
Okay, good.
I went out, and I put the small fishes, the baby fishes, in a small tank with 1 liter and half of water. And then they was contaminated with that parasite, and I put 20 milliliters of liquid plasma of copper. And some days later, all the other big fishes, they had died. And I cleaned up the big tank and make it all ready to put babies. And they are living at fine, and they have no more symptoms, no more salt-like things on the skin, and they are very happy. So I think the liquid copper plasma kills the parasite. Perhaps you can use that in your fish tanks when you have also some kind of illness on the fishes.
Yeah, it's a very good observation there, Boris. And it's a case of, it's using the right quantities, you know, what's just enough to interact with the bacteria and not too much so that it actually harms the fish.
Because I came over that idea when I saw that illness and that strange thing. I went on the internet investigating what it was and what we can do. And they don't know about plasma, liquid plasma, but they talk about copper. I don't know in which state or which way, but they also told to not put too much to not kill the fishes also. So I was thinking, so when they use normal copper, I will use liquid copper plasma to try. And it worked with only 20 milliliter for 1 liter, 1.5 liter of tank. Thank you for sharing.
No, thank you for sharing. That's valuable news. You know, our experience with the fish is before we had started using any of the plasmas, it was always generally winter time when we had quite a few fish deaths, because that's when their whole sort of system slows down. It's cold water, and so they really battle to fight off any disease. And so every winter we would have quite a few, probably sort of 10 or so, 10 or 15 fish deaths from each one of our tanks. And there's very little one can do about it. And then we started using the plasma, and from the time when we started using the plasma, I think we'd gone through 2 winters where I think we had 1 or 2 fish deaths. So it's particularly the CO2 and the zinc and that in the water provides also a very healthy environment for the fish. So it was very beneficial for the fish. And, you know, when one looks at the whole fish industry today, where we're having all this captive fish and the fish have been fed all these antibiotics, you know, I think there's a lot of experiments there that are open to do whether one can use a lot of the GANS materials in the fish water or in the fish food to make the fish a lot healthier, so that they can be, you know, less use of these antibiotics for any of the farmed animals.
So much research to conduct.
Yes, well, we're just sort of highlighting what needs to be done, and I think there'll be a lot of scientists that will come behind us and pick it all up and then do the actual hard research for us. So it's good, you know. We're doing a lot of work, beneficial work for years to come, for people to come along and for the scientists to come along and pick it up and really do the hard work. Okay, so the next section was just essentially as we'd moved on to soaking the seeds in the water. Here we've seen we have our daikon radish seeds that we use, and so we just soak them in water, and we soak them for 12, 24 hours. At the moment, we just do it overnight. And then we seed. So because of they are the bigger seeds, it's a lot easier to work with. One can just soak them and then rinse them. And then you're able to seed them a lot quicker, easier. And you know, what we had found is this particular time we tried to do a little experiment where we'd used plain water and then also the plasma water. And this is just part of that experiment, but I just wanted to show how the, even on the top one, didn't really notice a lot of difference. One, certainly when you look at the root structure of the plants, that's one observation that we've seen time and time again, is that the root growth and the vigor of the roots of the plants that have been exposed to the CO2 is huge. You know, the complexity of the roots that we're getting on our lettuce compared to before, and you know, a healthy root structure always gives you your healthy plant. So it has huge impacts on your root structure of your plants. So I just wanted to bring that into it. And when you look at your CO2 as to why you get your CO2 work, is because when you look at your CO2 GANs and then you look at your seed, it's sort of amino acid structure based. So you've got your CO, H, and N. So you have your connection, you've got your carbon connection, and you've got your oxygen connection with your amino acid based. And so that's why the CO2 that we use works so well. The other important point to remember is when you're soaking your seeds and then you plant the seeds and you've got your plants growing, we're not just changing that environment around that tiny little seed. You know, we've added fields to that seed, so we've added fields to the plant that's growing, and so it creates a stronger environment around that plant, which interacts with and that plant is interacting with other plants and other environments around it. So what one is creating is you almost creating your huge call it bubble or dome around your plant. We don't see it, but it has an impact a huge impact, and the fields are spreading quite far from using the GANS waters. I think we sort of have to look at least 50 or 100 meters separation if we're wanting to try and do some sort of direct comparison experiments because of the interaction of the fields. So it's not just that tiny little seed that we are affecting and impacting on. It's a huge environment that is created when we use the plasma water. So, you know, adding the plasma, so we've got the stronger magnetic field in the plant, leads to the change in that environment that we see. Your plants are become more independent of outside magnetic gravitational fields. We've seen, and a lot of experiments have been done and seen, you know, less damage from excessive heats in the summer, very strong, healthy plants, and very little problems with mold or fungus in very high humid and low light conditions. That's another experiment that people can try with, depending on your climate, but if you get a lot of mold and fungus on plants, is to play around with the small little ratios of your copper GANs and possibly CO2 GANs as a spray to clear up your mold and fungus problems. But if you are growing with the plasma, then you generally have very few problems. Plants need less water. Yeah, you always see the good color, good vigor in the plants. and you get a longer shelf life from harvesting. And essentially, when you are spraying your plants or putting GANs on your seeds in your garden and everything around, you are creating that condition environment around the plant which says I'm healthy. And so, you know, the plant is not calling in the bugs to come and feed off me. Because when we have a look at when a plant is unhealthy, the way I see it is why plants get infestations of pests is you know, we call them pests, but for the plants and the bugs, it's a different dynamic. Because when the plant is unhealthy, it would like to give its fields, and so it will call in essentially, you know, the different bugs that are going to come in and the pests. And so the plant is essentially giving itself up for those pests. So it becomes food for those pests because it knows that it's unhappy in its current environment and needs to move on. So we've got to, I look at the whole pest story as a totally different point of view. Is if I do see any bugs affecting my plants, then the first thing I look at is, okay, my plant is not happy, it's unhealthy, what is my plant needing? I don't run for any pesticide spray because that's not solving the problem. You've got to look at why your plant is unhappy, and you need to change that condition, that health of that plant. So it's just looking at things entirely differently now when you're working in your garden. And then just to round off, when we look at our original seed and so thousands of years ago, we probably would have had our grass seed that we have today. And over time, this plant is exposed to different climate conditions. We have heat and cold and the drought, and rain. And plants adapt to their conditions. Because plants can't get up and walk and find a better spot, they have learned to develop and adapt to the conditions of where they are. Now, these different conditions of heat, cold, drought, and rain are all different magnetical and gravitational fields. And these layers of information are added to the seed's genetic makeup. And so the plant and the seed develop and change over time. And all these layers of information, all in the fields, is all about the germination, the size, and the color of the plants and how they've adapted to their environments. And then we came along and we started adding more changes. You know, we saw that the grass produced its seeds, so we started cultivating them over time. And you know, we've done that by taking only those plants that produce more and larger seeds or fruits, and then we will just cultivate that type of plant. So again, we've taken and trying to develop different plants, and that plants. Is somebody's mic open? No. And so the plants have learned to adapt to all these environments, different environments, and they're just different field strength environments, which they've taken on as the information. And so as we've cultivated that original plant, it's basically, we have what we call wheat today, which is essentially just a grass originally, but nature's cultivated it, the plant has adapted itself, and then we've come along and we've adapted this plant as well, to the point where those seeds are much bigger than what they originally were. And that's where we have what we call the wheat today. So this was done over time and using the changes in the environment. And so we have added more layers of different magnetic gravitational fields to that original seed. It's just all the layers of information and how that plant has adapted to those environments over the years. So if one could just try and illustrate or imagine, the only way I could do it was, if you have a look at our original seed there in the middle, and so over time, very much like the rings of a bark when you cut a tree. We're just adding layers and layers of information, layers of different conditions that that plant was exposed to over the time, which is all translated back into this when that plant seeds. And so it just builds, that seed builds and builds this information over time to the point of where we have that wheat seed today. So it's just layers and layers of magnetic gravitational information. Okay, so what we would like to do, and I think we have discussed quite a bit of it today, and a lot of people are doing various experiments at home on their farm, is we like anybody to do more and more testing at home and try by soaking the seeds in the different liquid plasma waters of your ganses, different combinations, and soak for different times. You know, put these in the ground and record their growth, and then just give us feedback of your results. An important point is to take note of the effects that it has on other plants in the area, other animals in the environment, because one has to take a look at your total environment that you are impacting on when you're doing such experiments. And that's all that I have for today. Any further questions?
Yeah, do you suggest to start the seeds after soaking, put it in a little containers, and then once the plants start to grow, and then I plant it in the ground? Or
either way, some plants, it depends on how you do it. Some plants like being planted directly into the ground. Whenever you are what we call transplanting, so you'd grow it into a little seedling pot, and then you would transplant that into the ground. Just bear in mind, every time you're changing the conditions, you're changing that environment for that plant. You know, with it, that little plant sitting in that pot, it's in a certain environment. When you put it into that ground, you're now changing that environment around that little plant, and so it takes time to adapt to that new environment. So there is no hard and fast rule that, you know, each plant is a little bit different, and it depends on your circumstances.
and then another question is, springtime, you know, you have lower temperatures. You think if I go into the ground or put it outside, building a little loop, it would be good, or just go for the bare air, you know, outside?
Again, it depends on your environment and where you are. You know, in our case, we grow our radish all year round, so it's winter time as well. And so what we do is, when we soak our seeds, we just put it onto a little foot mat, you know, that like a little electric foot mat, so that keeps it warm. And so we just keep it at a nice warm temperature, which helps the germination. So that's an easy way to, if you keep a nice warm environment, especially coming out of winter and you want to get things planted early, then you can help along that germination by keeping a nice warm environment.
Thank you.
Everywhere is different here.
Jim, this is Thomas from Switzerland.
Yes, Thomas.
I would have just a few remarks about things you had been discussing before, about the soil, about the water, and the copper. I have started about, what shall I say, 10 years ago, watering all my garden with the so-called EM1, effective microorganisms, from this Japanese professor. And the surrounding has become so lush and green, and there is no more rotting going on in the garden. This has all sort of like changed totally. That as a remark about giving the soil some help that the things don't rot. And then you also have much less pests, because the wrong pests, they like rot, but they don't like the contrary. Then about the water. I have received a few weeks ago this wonderful, very big pitcher from, I think it came from Romania or Bulgaria or somewhere, where Mr. Keshe has like a stick which goes into the water, and there is, I think it's CO2 plasma. And that changes the water. We have rather hard water, very good water, but it's rather hard. And after a few hours only, this pitcher, which takes maybe 2 liters, changes the water into a alkaline situation, and it becomes very, very smooth. And this water, I use it to water my plants inside the house. Then regarding the copper, I'm using a very, very old technique which I have received from my grandmother and she most probably before. We take just a little bit of a copper rod and put it especially to the roses about a few centimeters away from the stem into the soil. And I do the same with the tomato. And roses have very often different pests which attack roses. And with the tomato, it's the same. And these problems I have had since I'm planting myself. That's soon 60 years. I never had any problems, because the copper sort of gives the plant a strength, so it can fight itself any of these diseases. You know, on the roses there is this sort of like a white film, or on the tomato leaves, and they disappear. As a matter of fact, I do it with the roses. I put new rods every spring, and with the tomato as soon as I have planted them. That's actually all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Yeah, I think there's, when you look at the soil structure itself, it's so important. And I think a lot of agriculture today tends to ignore the soil. And I think a lot of the times we've degraded the soil to such a degree that I think the soil is only there just to hold the plant up. There's almost no life left in the soil. And I think part of the job is to use the plasmas to actually bring back the life back to the soil and bring it back to balance, because if that's in balance and that's healthy, it's interacting with the plant life, making the plant healthy. So it's all links. It's all, as a relationship there. So the soil is very, to me, is very, very important. And I think the copper seems to be quite a theme that we've come across today, and I think we can all go back and try and think of why this copper is working in the various ways that we've heard today, and try and understand it from a plasmatic point of view. And maybe we should play around with some more experiments. And if we use the nano-coated copper instead of the plain copper, would we have the same effects? So it's quite interesting that has come up throughout the whole work today.
I forgot about this. I recently watched a documental from Alaska, the Earth Beam, how this guy in Alaska started to experiment with the electromagnetic field of the Earth with the copper wire and putting clips, and he had flowers and maintained the life of the flower longer by having earth in the container where it was the water. And people also in the town, they start to get the health benefits of earthing. And there is a documental about that. I forgot. And that's what I also saw how they use the copper wires to ground, you know, to get connected to the electrical the field of the earth. Even the measure the plasma of a person, and they show in the TV how the plasma was more dynamic. The blood of the person was more dynamic when it was earthing, connected to the earth, and when it was not. So that's why I think the copper is so good, because it's helping us the link or the connection to the earth electrical magnetic field. We are earthing, you know.
Jim, about the soil.
Yes.
About the soil, as a matter of fact, is the essential thing. I mean, we in Switzerland, we have sort of spoiled our soils. They are literally no worth anything in the last few years. They have to give fertilizers up to an extent that we can find it all in our water now. And I've seen it in changing the soil from a sour situation into an alkaline situation. Just about 7 and something, and when there is nothing rotting in the soil, it's sort of everything starts growing just like mad. And the foliages in all my trees around the garden, everything is, since then I have changed this. It has taken maybe 2 years, but I continue in watering my garden with a 2.5% of this EM1 solution, which I prepare myself. I have one of these little apparatuses where you put from this EM1 original solution plus sugar cane, melasse, and water, and then you keep it for a few days till it turns really brown, and it has then a very sour taste. And then I take this for myself. I drink it, and my intestines are absolutely clean, and I give it to the garden. And from there on, now I want to try and use this water from the pitcher I have from Keshe organization, and give this, for instance, to the roses and the different plants I have in, because the garden I have it almost green. I have a huge rose bush, and then the rest of the roses I have it on the terraces. But I will start watering with this water, because, as I said, I water all my plants inside the house. And for instance, since I have it, my dog gets only this water, but he even prefers to go. I have some papyrus plant, and he loves to go and take the water there. And this papyrus plant, I have started to once a week, I put about 2 liters of this CH2 informed water. And I must say, I don't know exactly what GANS is in this stick, but because I haven't found it on the sales page of the Keshe Foundation. But anyway, just to come again to the soil, I think we are all everywhere in the whole world. The way we treat our soil is criminal, absolutely criminal. And if we are going on like this without doing things like you propose, we are seeing that this will end in certain areas in disasters.
Yeah, I see it with a lot of when we look at sort of long term down the line, and my thinking is the farmers of today. A lot of farmers of today will change into people that will regenerate the farms and regenerate areas, and using this technology. Because if we need less and less food, we can at least start restoring nature back to its prime. And I think this technology will be a great tool to be able to do that.
a comment on the microbes, a couple of them. I also work with the beneficial microbes and brew them and mix my CO2 zinc with them when I water the plants. And also, Rudolf Steiner's work in agriculture, he didn't speak a lot about microbes, but you realize that what he's working with there back in the turn of the century up to about 1920 and has been carried on from there, it's very clearly that he is working with the beneficial microbes in the soils and replenishing the soils. But it's also clear about the way he creates his preparations, that in some ways he is creating preparations that are connected to the non-matter state of what we experience with the GANSes. And so he doesn't speak about that, but it's clearly a connection. So in working with those different herbs and the microbes and the plasmas, I think there's a lot here to learn and play with. And also Estelle, you had mentioned in there about muscle testing, talking to the plants, communicating with the plants, asking them what they need, and in a certain way connecting to the soil of the plants and the elementals. And this woman, Michelle Wright, created a Perelandra garden a number of years ago and has done very specific research in this area. And if you go to YouTube, you can do a search for Perelandra Garden. And then I also put their website up in the chat. And it's just good information to, bring into the plasma work, because I think we're weaving our experience with the plasmas, with what we know, and what so much has been done in the past that has actually worked. And when we take a closer look at those things, it's all connected to the plasma and the plasma fields. So, and Jim and Rick, thank you for this session. It's been excellently presented. And your time and your presentation, Jim, was just so excellent. Thank you.
This is Estela. The trees and the plants have the roots. It's almost like our intestines. And what I learned is my health went bad because I had bad intestine, a bad bacteria. And I've been actually also taking for a year the EM1 myself. I'm familiar with that. That's why because we've been doing research and I was focusing on my health and my husband was focusing on the plants. So they were interested by my experience, even though I wasn't consciously studying, I was experiencing what the kids were doing in the farm. We got the microscope and we were following the work of a Oregon woman who believes save the planet by saving the soil with the compost teas and focusing on the good bacteria like the probiotics in your intestines, that your immune system, you can get stronger by improving your gut and changing your food and everything. So kind of I've been exposed into the problematic and also finding the healing solution. And through also what we learn in Keshe, right? The soul and communication of the soul and the fields and the strengths of the fields. And I think at one point I was doing the sound and working with the wind and the trees and the communicating to try to save the crop. and it worked. And today I'm thinking, and I say, well, now I need to do it more consciously because it works, it's real. I wasn't conscious that it was real, like the communications through the field, because the lack of trust. of believing that you have the power to communicate, you know. And that's what I'm faced. That's why I'm so excited now going back, because it's real and we can make a difference. So that's
Stella,
yeah.
this is absolutely right what you say. We have learned when I was a kid, my grandmother has always said, you have to talk to the plants. You have to tell them how wonderful they are. You have to communicate, an art of just be happy when you're in the garden. That makes the plants happy. And it's true. She always had a flower garden, which was an absolute paradise. Everything was twice as high as the other plants, and the flowers were wonderful. And I grew up like this, and I've always done it. And I must say you, when I came behind or about this EM1, these effective microorganisms, where we really don't know what this Japanese professor put in it, but it is sort of absolutely wonderful. And he has proven that this works very, very well, because he has brought this to Bangkok. And Bangkok had in summer always this terrible problem. All these canals were stinking. And when he started treating the canals with EM1, this bad odor just went away. So just to confirm to you, you're absolutely right about also that the roots look like intestines. And if our intestines are clean and good, and there we can do an enormous thing with EM1, we don't develop any diseases. And I'm always convinced that the garden is the same. And this year I will now start to try to water CO2 or copper informed water. And I tell you, I have in my house, in every room, a big picture of a plasma informed water, from CO2, CH3, all the things with different plants. And all the people who come to my house always say, why is it in your house? It's so quiet. It's so positive. When we come with a bad mood, we immediately change into a positive feeling. And I'm sure that there are all these fields which have sort of distributed itself together with the two mographs I have in the whole house. And please.
Yeah, I have to add that a rule in my house, when they were doing the compost tea, which is the preparation of that, it would be almost like a GANS, because they make it bubble for 24 hours. The water was at perfect pH 6.8. And also nobody could, if anybody's in a bad mood or something, have to leave, because it was part of the rule. It's like a chef cooking in the kitchen, you know, nobody can bother the person who is doing the compost tea. And it is same with the plants. If they do in the gardening, I mean, that was the dynamic of the house. And I saw the difference. The plants respond to that kind of respect. It's almost like a sacred space, you know, that the garden, that you couldn't be having music, it wouldn't be negative. It has to be good rock and roll, because they farm with the music. So there were some house rules that, you know, we have to respect. And now I understand it. And these guys are intuitive, you know, they do it because they love it to do it. And that also makes a big difference.
Maybe we look at the microbes as little GANS boxes.
Yes.
I believe is that it's this. I think it's the exchange of the fields. Like if we humans, and then we co-creating with the good bacteria and the good, you know, creating a new field with an intention. and helping the plants in this case, and the plants take it because it's like a living plasma that is a collection of fields that you create a new intention of work together towards to the benefit of the soil or the plants. And I think that's is like the natural way of nature work. But now you're doing a recipe of a new things, like in a different way, like in traditional way. Now there's the engineers, they do with the chemicals, but they don't put the heart, has no heart, it's harmful. There is no respect for the consideration for the plant. I think it's like the traditional medicine. They look at the individual as a piece of bones and meat. And the doctor that treats with the herbs, it see the person as body, soul, everything. And I think it's a different way of doing something good. And that's what it's not magic. In the olden days, they will say, oh, it's a witch or alchemist. Like in the olden days, they used to use the invisible forces to modify things. Now we understand these invisible forces. It's nature. It's how nature works. And I think that's why it's working, because we're respecting the forces, because they're working in the natural way.
And you know, I think this is our task. This is our mission, to make the lion and the lamb live together in one nest.
And this is part of the living symphony, because it's also different kind of music, right? It's just it's the music of growing. I mean, I'm sure if we put a microphone during the process from a seed to a plant, there is some kind of music of that, singing of that plant, you know? So it's the creation. And I don't know how, I always listen to things, and it's true, is nature expand and expand. It's like the music is continuously in emotion. And the opposite is compression. Compression goes to what? To some point, no more moving, because it's disappear. So I think expansion and abundance is the field of creation, and that's what we are connected into, tapping into the way of having a continuous, expansion. Everything we touch, we're gonna expand and transform, because it's a different polarity. Is the good one.
Thank you all for those lovely comments. Do we
thank you. You're an inspiration.
Well, I've always had an affinity for nature. So to me, I enjoy this. So I learn a lot by observing.
That is what our farmers don't do anymore. They're just a few on huge farms with enormous machines. And at the end of the day, the most important thing is money. Money makes the world go round. And they don't communicate anymore. They almost don't communicate anymore with their animals.
Yeah, we've certainly gone so far away from any association with nature, and we have to get back there. So nature will be our teacher, as I always keep on saying, and we have to learn.
Yeah, and I see, because I experience myself changing environment, working in the city, having a paycheck, to going into this new area, farming, and trying not to be greedy or stressful because you don't have money. and you're learning. And if you do it from the soul point of view, you cannot be thinking, oh, we know it's, you know, we don't have money, how we're going to pay the bills. You can't put that negativity, stress. That's what I'm talking about, you know, we have to learn how to do things in a different perspective, not thinking in the future, being connected in the present, and building the garden from the present, and not thinking in the material world. And that was a big challenge, and to change that, because our brain or belief system is being trained to think in that way. And if you're really communicating with the plant, you can't tell the plant, hey, I need this amount of money. You know, you need to perform good. That's why the concept of, you know, be grateful to the plant, and, you know, we're gonna work together and see what, you know, we receive and how we make it. And that was a big challenge. But,
You know,
yeah, sorry.
sorry, Stella. Well said. You know, Jim, I think it is in the country. It's not we are learning from the nature. Now we will teach the nature, the law of the universe. Now we are the teachers.
I think we are more together.
I think
working.
we're so
Yeah.
far behind that we have to learn from nature. Nature's already doing it. Nature's already perfected it. It's us that have not, and we have to catch up.
I think you're right, Jim. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Keshe had indicated that the plants are much more clever than we are. You've got the olive trees living for 2,000 years, the redwoods 500 years. They've diversified in all different shapes and sizes and structures under the ocean, every landmass. So I think we have a tremendous amount to learn from the plants, and I want to thank the foundation for opening my eyes to some of these things. You know, we think we're big stuff if we live 50 or 100 years. But I was just envisioning like having a large oak tree teach the class.
Well,
Mark, they actually do. When we were children, we were going into the forest with our teacher, and she told us which tree is which tree and so on. And this is done. And when you mention what do the trees actually have, the trees have what I think Mr. Keshe is saying. We are soon at the point where we will have instant communication. The trees are all interconnected through a mycelium just underneath the soil. And as soon as something negative arrives, you can see that trees inform other trees, and they start preparing themselves to eventually sort of like give up things these pests don't like. So they have a way of communication which is really instant and which knows no borders.
Thank you.
Thomas, I think when you talk of the communication of the trees, I think it goes one step further. I don't think it needs the mycelium in the ground. The trees are communicating through their souls, through the fields. They don't need any physical connection through the ground.
But don't you think that eventually the mycelium gives them the possibility of doing what you say? Because you can see that if you cut the mycelium in the ground, certain parts of the tree die away.
The mycelium create, I mean, at the base of the mycelium is the plasma fields. We say it's communicating through the mycelium, and that's true.
But it's actually the plasma fields, yes. You're
when
right.
you look at it deeper, it's the fields that are actually taking place there. It's like photosynthesis and plasma synthesis. We observe one thing, but when we look at it with a different eye, it's really plasma that's at work.
You might be absolutely right. And the wonderful thing is that we do still have all over the world quite big forests, and going also with children and elderly people and sick people into these forests and just sort of try to take up this wonderful feeling a forest gives, from little winds to little flowers to sunshine which comes in. It is a healing station. And outside we don't have this anymore because the soil is so rotten.
There is I just want to share, because I've been looking into the soil. There is a Brazilian guy, I think his name is Gauch, or is with a G. It's he's been doing the healing of the forest in Brazil by trimming, pruning the trees and using the bark of the trees along the line of the planting. And then at the same time, he used the co-creation of different plants. For example, he used trees, like a tree and a fruit tree, and the low planting, like vegetables, and the lower level. So he creates lines on this level. And within 16 months, he can change the pH of the soil, and because the pruning of the work of the different plants, and you know how the trees helps the soil with the compost, the changing of the I don't know how to say it, and I'm gonna try to find the link and put it, because it's very interesting. It is applied at the small scale and a commercial scale, but it is being done by working with the hands and the uses of the trees. Anyway, thank you.
Okay. Well, I think we can, nearly time, we can call it a close.
Yeah. Any last questions or comments?
Is this going to be subtitled also?
At some point in the future, yes.
Because I got this lady I mentioned, the agricultural engineer. She's listening to it, but she's asking for help on the translating. So I wrote to her and told her that in the near future we'd be doing this. This goes to María Inés. Estoy comentando que esto va a estar traducido en el futuro, así que ahí podrás verlo traducido.
Bueno, yo podemos trabajar juntos en eso.
It's no problem, John. It's we can help, but she need to pay 100 plasma coin.
Only that. I thought it was 500.
Did the class start at 5 today because of the daylight savings time?
If you're in the States, yes.
But I thought Europe also uses the daylight savings.
Changes later, I think.
Because I okay.
In Europe, I think we change at the end of the month, something like that. This is a stupid thing. This daylight saving doesn't bring anything. I think the few last years where the Russians have stopped it showed it very well. It just brings the cows out of their rhythm twice a year, and they have to readjust. And to us, it doesn't bring a thing.
Yeah, next week the Europeans will chime in for their time, so it's going to be an hour difference here just for the week for North America.
It is in 3 hours from now, 15 minutes.
Thank you, Flint.
Yeah.
Summertime starts on Sunday, March 25th in Europe.
Spring.
Why don't we change to Greenwich Mean Time? That doesn't change.
Oh, look, all these administrators behind desks somewhere in administrations, they have the weirdest ideas from time, like in the EU, when suddenly cucumbers had to be straight, like a piece of wood, or the bananas had to have a very special form, so that they could put a few bundles more in a carton. Now they found out that these bananas cannot be grown anymore because they have diseases. Now they have to go back to the original bananas because they're much more strong. And the same with the cucumbers. It's all our administrators. They're really crazy.
I have a wish. Now the springtime is coming. Maybe every gardener, we can work with the soil, and every time we do the plasma, whatever we doing, we put it like we can, like a network. Like I am in California, another person is in Australia, another person is in Argentina, and this plasma field through the ground gets, transmitted, and see if we can co-create with the earth and the fields and the microorganism.
Well, this administrator says the time has come to close.
Yes.
And we all thank him and you all very, very much for the presentation.
It's been a lovely chatting with everybody, and a lot of good discussions came out today. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you kindly, Jim. And Flint.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Flint and Vince and Rick.
And thank you, Jim. So, yes, catch our next public broadcast. It'll be tomorrow afternoon at 4 p.m. Central European Time for the 31st One Nation, One Planet, One Race for World Peace. Till then, we'll see. Have a good afternoon, rest of your day or evening, and we'll see you then.